What is up, everybody? I'm Milan Jordan. Welcome to the MMA Daily Blitz, brought to you by FanStream Sports, powered by DSP Media. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. At Milan Jordan is my handle on X, Threads, and Instagram. Also, be sure to check out our website, FanStreamSports.com, for more great content along with our YouTube page. All right, we had lots of hype and anticipation heading into UFC 300 this past Saturday. It was an absolutely stacked card. It was headlined by not one, not two, but three title fights. And overall fight card participants, 12 of the 26 fighters on that card were current or former UFC champions. So a lot of hype, as I mentioned, for UFC 300. Well, it certainly lived up to the fight, to the hype, and then some. Let's get right to it. The main event was for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship between Alex Pereira and Jamal Hill, a current and former champion. Critics of Alex Pereira were looking for him to make a statement, and well, he certainly did. He made fairly quick work of Jamal Hill, landing a big left hook that didn't even really land totally flush, but had so much power behind it, enough power behind it, to knock Hill to the canvas. Then Pereira pounced on Hill before referee Herb Dean called the fight. Just 3 minutes, 14 seconds into the very first round, Alex Pereira retains the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship. Since moving up to 205, Pereira is 3-0, with each victory coming over a former title holder. He offered the fight at heavyweight at the next pay-per-view, UFC 301 in Brazil, just 3 weeks after this fight, but UFC CEO Dana White quickly put the kibosh on that idea. Nonetheless, we'll see what's next for Alex Pereira at the light heavyweight division as he again retains his belt. Co-main event, was for the UFC Women's Strawweight Championship, and history was made as this was the first ever all-Chinese UFC Championship fight as Zhang Weili took on Yan Xiaonan, and while Zhang Weili wins by unanimous decision 49-45 on all three judges' scorecards to retain the Strawweight Championship, Zhang sunk in a deep rear naked choke late in the first round, but Yan was saved by the bell. And to her credit, Yan was still able to last the full 25 minutes of this fight, fighting off multiple submission attempts, even knocking Zhang down a couple of times. But it was Zhang who earns the unanimous decision victory and keeps her UFC Strawweight Championship. The third fight on this card, I mentioned this could be fight of the night potential. Performance of the night was all that. Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje for the BMF belt. And look, as a combined 284 significant strikes were landed by these two. Max Holloway busted Gaethje's nose with a spinning back kick at the end of round one. From then on, Holloway controlled most of the fight. With 10 seconds left in the final round in the fight, Holloway pointed for Gaethje to stand in the middle of the octagon with him. Gaethje, of course, obliged, and the two traded punches the rest of the way, with Holloway landing a picture-perfect right on Gaethje's jaw just before the final bell that knocked Gaethje out cold with just 1 second left in the fight. So officially, Max Holloway wins via knockout at 4:59 of round number 5. Certainly this knockout, you see in the highlights, I'm sure, it was a seminal moment on a monumental card. After getting the BMF belt wrapped around his waist by UFC legend and Hall of Famer Mark the Hammer Coleman, Holloway called out 155-pound champ Ilia Topuria for a shot at the lightweight title. Topuria has said, well, look, how about we fight for the BMF title as well? Who knows if and when these two will finally hook up, we shall see. I mentioned Mark Coleman. He was Mark the Hammer Coleman, UFC Hall of Famer, put the BMF belt around Max Holloway's waist. Great ovation. Mark Coleman was there with his daughters, and he was introduced to the crowd and to a rounding ovation, and deservedly so. As I mentioned, he's one of the legends of the sport, one of the fighters who really laid the groundwork for MMA and for the UFC prior to the Zuffa era, and really laid the foundation for this sport, amongst others. But Mark Coleman, the first ever UFC heavyweight champion, a Hall of Famer. Of course, you remember last month that he saved both of his parents' lives in a house fire in Fremont, Ohio. And also he was hospitalized for a couple of days due to a smoke inhalation where he was fighting for his life. And of course, anyone who knows Mark the Hammer Coleman, of course, he fought through that. He was back at it within a couple of days and back at the gym less than a week later. Since then, he's gone around in local fire departments here in Columbus, really raising awareness about the importance of smoke detectors and smoke alarms in people's homes. His parents' house did not have that, and it nearly cost them their lives. But so Mark Coleman taking this, being a real beacon of positivity over the last few years, being sober and fighting some health issues, taking this negative and turning it into a positive by raising awareness for having the importance of smoke alarms and smoke detectors in people's homes. So kudos to UFC Hall of Famer and MMA legend Mark the Hammer Coleman. All right, more on the UFC 300 main event card. In the lightweight division, it was Arman Tsarukyan defeating Charles Oliveira. It was a close fight. Tsarukyan ends up winning by a split decision. It was an entertaining back-and-forth fight. It really came down to the third round. Tsarukyan took the fight to the ground, controlling things. Oliveira tried a Darce choke before the final horn. The fight was really that close, but it was Tsarukyan who earns his fourth straight win to perhaps put him in line for a lightweight title shot later this year. Opening fight of the main card for UFC 300 was Bo Nickel defeating Cody Brundage via rear naked choke at round number 2. It was the first time Nickel had seen a second round in his brief MMA career. In fact, this fight with Cody Brundage lasted longer than Bo Nickel's previous 5 fights combined, but nonetheless, it was another dominant performance from the elite wrestler from Penn State. Bo Nickel controlled Brundage throughout the fight before securing the rear naked choke as Bo Nickel improves to 6-0, all those being finishes as a mixed martial artist. The prelims were star-studded as well. Former UFC light heavyweight champ Yuri Prochazka beat Alexander Rakic via second-round TKO. This was a really entertaining fight. Rakic kept landing leg kicks throughout the first round that at one point saw Prochazka having trouble standing and putting weight on it, but former champ, he started gaining some momentum late in the first round. And while that continued into round number 2, he landed a combination that wobbled Rakic. Prochazka literally threw him to the canvas and finished the fight with a couple more blows to get back on a winning track. He would love to fight Alex Pereira for the light heavyweight title. Next time out, we shall see. That fight happened last year, of course, with Pereira winning. But we'll see if those two hook up again here in the very near future. Speaking of another former champion, former 135-pound champ, Aljamain Sterling, made his debut at 145 pounds, taking on Calvin Kattar. Sterling was in complete control in this fight. He utilized his wrestling and grappling to neutralize Kattar, securing 8 takedowns with nearly 11 minutes of control time. That's a 15-minute fight, folks, so that's how dominant Aljamain Sterling was. Kattar had just 5 seconds of control time in this entire fight. All 3 judges scored it 30-27 in favor of Aljo, and to be honest, it didn't even really seem that close. Now, some fans were booing because there wasn't a lot of action, but look, Aljamain Sterling used his strengths, and not only to show off his strengths, he had obviously the obvious wrestling and grappling advantage, but also, as I mentioned, to neutralize Calvin Kattar to come back and land any kind of offense. Perhaps the most anticipated card on the prelims, Kayla Harrison made her long-awaited UFC debut against former champion Holly Holm. And look, if there are any doubts about Kayla Harrison proving that she belongs in the UFC, look, they were erased Saturday night. She absolutely belongs in the UFC and could very well be a future champion. Kayla Harrison, one of the top, if not the top female fighter in the world. She defeated Holly Holm via rear naked choke in round number 2. And Holly Holm, she's a former world champion boxer. She surprised everybody, including Kayla Harrison, by trying to take her down early in the fight. Well, it didn't work. Harrison, a 2-time Olympic gold medalist in judo, she countered, landed in half guard, and just dominated the rest of the fight. And up next for Kayla Harrison, maybe a shot at the 135-pound title against Raquel Pennington. As for Holly Holm, don't know what's next for the 42-year-old, but in a post-fight press conference, Dana White opined that maybe she should consider retirement. We'll see what happens for Holly Holm, but again, Kayla Harrison, it's fantastic work come Saturday night, winning this fight just 147 to round number 2. And obviously, bright things are in her future as well, as she just, again, proves that she's just one of, if not the best female fighters in the world. All right, rest of the prelim card rest of the prelim card fights, easy for me to say. Diego Lopez defeated Sodiq Yusuff by first round TKO. Renato Moicano looked like he was going to be finishing the first round by Jalen Turner, but Moicano was able to come back and defeat Jalen Turner via TKO late in round number 2. Jessica Andrade wins by split decision over Marina Rodriguez. Bobby Green defeated Jim Miller by unanimous decision, and Jim Miller, he fought at UFC 101. He had a victory at UFC 200. Well, couldn't get the trifecta at UFC 300. He ends up losing by unanimous decision, and Bobby Green has made a bloody mess of Jim Miller, but Jim Miller, his toughness and his warrior-like spirit and mentality got him through the fight. But when all was said and done, it was Bobby Green winning 30-27, 30-25, and 29-26 in this fight. And kicking off the prelims, a couple of former champions. Again, I mentioned how stacked this card was. Davison Figueiredo defeated Cody Garbrandt by rear naked choke in round number 2. Garbrandt was able to mount some offense early on, but then Figueiredo came back and is able to sink in the submission late in round number 2. Well, with a huge event, the UFC would make some big announcements, and well, none was bigger this past weekend than the long-awaited return of the notorious one, Conor McGregor, as he will finally fight Michael Chandler. Those two will headline UFC 303 to cap off International Fight Week on June 29th. This will be McGregor's first fight since getting his leg snapped by Dustin Poirier back in the summer of 2021. So it will be almost 3 years since his last appearance in the octagon. Meanwhile, Michael Chandler, he's had a long layoff as well. He last appeared inside the octagon in November 2022. Ironically, also a loss to Dustin Poirier. Both fighters had into this contest losing 3 of their last 4 fights, but look, let's be honest. It's not going to quell the hype. It's not going to quell the excitement for this fight. Remember, McGregor and Chandler were opposing coaches on The Ultimate Fighter last year. We've known for 15 months that these two would fight each other. Well, after months of rumors and speculation, finally have a date, June 29th, UFC 303 at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. And by the way, this fight will be fought at 170 pounds. So should be great. It should be a great night of anticipation, great night of fights. And look, when at the top of their game, these two should put on one whale of a performance. Definitely looking forward to that. No other fights have been officially announced for UFC 303 at this time, but does it really matter? It's Conor McGregor. That's Michael Chandler. UFC 303, June 29th in Vegas at 170 pounds. Other fight announcements made by the UFC this past weekend. UFC 302 in Newark, New Jersey in early June will be headlined by a lightweight championship matchup. Islam Makhachev defends the title against Dustin Poirier. The co-main event should be a real knockout, drag-out fight in the middleweight division. Former champion Sean Strickland will go against Paulo Costa. All right, folks, well, that'll do it for this episode of the MMA Daily Blitz, brought to you by FanStream Sports, powered by DSP Media. Like, share, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me on Twitter/X and at Threads at Milan Jordan. Be sure to check out the new FanStream Sports app available for Apple and Android for round-the-clock programming. As always, thank you for checking out the MMA Daily Blitz. I will talk to you later.